1 Samuel chapter 17. I think we're the only ones here, so we don't have to wait around for anybody. We'll go through 2 chapters and go home.
If the rain scared them away.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13. All right. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll get right to it. Father God, we're grateful this evening, especially for the rain, and thankful that we've got a place that's dry we can come into. Especially thankful, Lord, for your word, how it speaks to our lives. And I pray tonight that your Holy Spirit would be given this opportunity to encourage us, because we all encounter giants in our life. And may we respond the way David did, so that we might have the victory in Jesus, in whose name I pray. Amen. So, we've got the Philistines on one side, and we've got the Israelites on the other side, and they describe Goliath only in physical terms. He was big. He was huge. He throws down this challenge, and of course, every time he does that, the Israelites run like cockroaches when you turn the light on. When I was a janitor at Bowling Green State University, I always thought that that was kind of an exaggeration. No. Man. And I hated those things. You turn the light on in a closet, they would just scatter. So when Goliath would come out, and I just get the sense from human beings that each time, because this went on for 40 days, that he would get closer and closer to where Israel was, and they would back up more and more. So Jesse sends David, and we talked about that last week. God's providence. Obviously, Jesse didn't want anything happening to David. And I'm guessing probably at this point in time, he is somewhere between he's probably around somewhere between 15 and 17 years old. He's 10 years younger than Jonathan. We know Jonathan started at least at the age of 20, and Saul's been a king for a little bit, not long. So David's not a boy. He might even be closer to 18. And in verse 15, that kind of gives scholars some difficulty. David goes back and forth, but remember, he had been picked to play. Saul would have these fits of rage. He he's probably bipolar was probably his thing. And when David would play, it would calm him down. But I think one of the explanations for why he did not necessarily recognize him is that when Saul would go into these fits, that's when they would call David. And mentally, he's not right, so he wouldn't necessarily know who's in his presence. And we've experienced that in our own families. When people are struggling, they're not physically well, we can go and visit them and they don't even know it. And they'll ask. And it reaches a point where you can ask them what they had for lunch and they can't remember. So we shouldn't be surprised that David can come in and out and Saul isn't real cognizant of what's happening. So let's pick it up in verse 20. And Tim, would you read through 27?
Early in the morning, David left the flock in care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from the lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David deferred. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes his disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him."
David gets there late. His brothers have already gone with the hoorah march. So he doesn't have, because remember his dad said, "I want you to find out how the boys are doing." So he got half of it. He got the supplies there, and he just let them with the guy that cooks the gruel. And then he goes on. And as he's walking up trying to find his brothers, Goliath makes his challenge. And every time he makes that challenge, people start chattering, and they're just going on and on and on. So he hears bits and pieces of this. And it's not like Saul made this deal all at once. It would have been more common the way you do for a wanted poster. Start with, I'll give a $100 reward for the man that catches him. And then he eludes capture, and so they up the ante, $200. And then the old westerns, they start with 1,000. Then the next time you 2,000, and on it goes. So Saul starts with I'm going to pay the person. And then I'm going to give them my daughter. And then no more taxes for the rest of your life. So it's not all at once. It was in increments. But the soldiers, they hear all this. And David can't believe his ears. Because there's no takers. And in his mind, it's not about the money. It's not about the women. It's about, why hasn't anybody stepped up to defend God's honor? This is crazy, guys. What are you afraid of? He's uncircumcised. God doesn't like him. And he's blaspheming our God. Why doesn't somebody go out there and deal with him? Now, that's why in verse 26, he continues to ask, because he cannot believe the reward. And up to now, everyone had been dealing with what they felt was a military problem. And this shepherd shows up, and he reveals they really have a theological problem. Too often in our lives, we continually tell God how big our problem is. Oh, God, like God doesn't know. What we ought to be doing is telling our problem how big our God is. There's a major difference. Hi, Naomi. So, the difference, and this is a direct direct, I can't think of the word I'm thinking about. The army of Saul is a reflection of their king. Their king doesn't have any relationship with God anymore. He's terrified. And so are they. But David, who has a completely different relationship. Remember Samuel years earlier anointed him and the Spirit of God came upon him. So now David is operating from the strength of the Spirit. And Saul's lost that. So you've got these people, they felt the same way their leader did. And this is an example of what happens to a people when their leadership is frightened. And I'm going through this right now, and it just drives me crazy. My home stomping grounds, those churches in mid-Michigan used to be so strong. They were so faith-filled. They were so empowered by the Spirit of God and faith that they said, hey, let's just take all of the preachers in this area and have them come together for a couple of days a week, and we'll just put them in different time slots. And any young man that wants to become a preacher can come to Rock Lake. And these preachers will start teaching them how to become preachers. And from that, Great Lakes Bible College began. Hundreds of men went through that into the churches because there was a need for churches in Michigan. And what was happening, our only Bible college, closest one was Cincinnati. So these young men that had any kind of promise at all, they would go to Ohio and they'd never come back. And we've seen the same thing happen during my ministry. We've had youth ministers who've come from other Bible colleges. Tennessee, among the one. And our kids go to Tennessee and they don't come back. We need preachers in Michigan. And what I've seen in the churches where I grew up, it's just disheartening because the leadership is having heart failure. They're just not believing that God is capable. And this is what was happening with this army of Sauls. David says, hey, I'll do it. In just about that time, Renee, would you read verses 28 through 30? Okay. We talked about this last week. David was an outcast in his family. He was, at best, a half-brother. At worst, he wasn't related at all. And they hated him, just like Joseph's brothers hated him. The first thing that this oldest brother does is he charges David with what? Right there in verse 28. What does he accuse David of? Yeah, there was a morbid curiosity. You immature, all you want to see is blood. But there's three other things that Eliab levels against his brother. Dereliction of duty. What are you doing here? You got more important things to do. You can't help anyways, you're not a part of the army. Why on earth did you leave those sheep as if he hadn't taken care of them? But it was not David's idea, it was Jesse's idea, and David found someone to wash the sheep. So two excuses. What's the other two? Yeah, conceit. Yeah, you're just so full of yourself. Coming down here, oh, take on the giant. And then the last thing was that he inferred that David was really a poor shepherd because there wasn't any sheep to watch. Just a few sheep. Well, that's what we read. But having come this far advanced in our Bible knowledge and human wisdom, what else might be gnawing at Eliab? Yes. How come I didn't get picked to be the king? I'm older. I'm better looking. Oh, man. Bypassed by Samuel. That's still gnawing at him. And, boy, if David had gone right back home, given his father a report, not good. He'd have get into even more trouble. Remember when Joseph gave a report to his dad? He said, oh, those guys, they're not even doing what they're supposed to be doing. Give him a negative report, and they hated him even more. So David can't win. So he says, I love that. What have I done now? As if he's done something before. They're constantly finding things wrong with him. What have I done now? Just ask the question. And so he goes on to somebody else. Okay. Chuck, would you read 31 through 40?
When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servants will go and fight with this Philistine. Then Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him, and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul clothed David with his garments, and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. He stuck his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine.
Obviously, when you got somebody that says, I'll do it, and they're all terrified, they immediately tell Saul, hey, we got somebody. Let's send him out. Maybe after Goliath kills him, he'll go home. So he meets with Saul, and when Saul gets a look at him, he can tell he's not a warrior. And he's not old enough. That's why I'm sure he's under 20, because he's not old enough to be in the army. And he says, what do you know about fighting? And David says, plenty. Now, in our versions, we have singular, a lion and a bear. But in the literal, those animals are plural. David says, I've encountered lions and bears. And in most of those situations, when David defeated these animals, they had their prey already in their mouth. And that would have helped him a little bit. But an African lion, and I don't know that I doubt that the lions of Israel were that big, but an African lion can leap over a 6-foot fence, grab a calf in its mouth. Of course, it crushes its head right away. With the calf in its mouth, leap back over the 6-foot fence and take it away. That's impressive. I doubt that the lions were that big. They were probably more like the size of puma, mountain lion. So maybe they can only jump over a 5-foot fence. But this was impressive that he could conquer these animals. And David's got something in the back of his mind that Saul knows nothing about. Eliab should, but he's not thinking clearly. When Samuel anointed David to be king, he anointed David to be king. He did not anoint David to go up and get killed by Goliath. In verse 37, David has no reservations. See, God has called us to be victors. We don't need to fear. I was at the hospice down in Trillium Woods last night. And this is so common for Christians. They pray, and the answers that they're praying for don't come, and they begin to get nervous. And the comment was made to me, I'm just so afraid that I'm not going to recover from this and I'm going to die. And someone else in the room said, oh, and I've got a major surgery coming up and I'm just terrified. And you know me well enough, I looked at them and I said, don't worry about your surgery. The worst thing that could happen to you is you'll come through it. If you're a Christian, absolutely the worst thing that can happen to you is you'll open your eyes the next day, nuts, I'm still here. That's tough when we've got children because we're thinking about them. I know. I just was beside myself when the judge ruled that my boys would be drugged 157 miles from me and I would only see them on occasion. And when I was crying out to God, why would you do that? He asked me, Bruce, who do you think can do a better job of raising your boys? Me or you? Wow. I could have lived a lifetime without God asking me that question. And I've got a son that is living proof that God can do a better job. So David says, I'm not worried about it. He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. So I said, okay, why don't you wear my stuff? We have no idea why Saul would want him to wear his garb. Unless he thought maybe he could take part of the credit. Well, after all, he was wearing my armor. But the very fact that Saul would even consider dressing David in his own armor indicates that David was not a boy. He must have been at least almost big enough to wear that. And but David chose to arm himself with what he knew best. So he took his stick in his hand. Remember, I said that there was a a stream that ran between those two mountains, a stream in this valley. He comes out from the camp, stops long enough, picks up 5 smooth stones, and puts them in his bag. And as Chuck ended that, approaches the Philistine. Now that causes the Philistine pause for a number of reasons. For 40 days, when he stepped out, Israel stepped back. Some scholars think that Goliath was sitting down. He brought a chair with him because he knew that they weren't going to respond to the challenge. So he's there after making his spiel, and David comes walking out. Okay, Jim, you're up 41 through 47.
Then the Philistine came on and approached David, and the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy, with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a God that you came to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his God. The Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, armies of Israel, whom you have conquered. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, and that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord did not deliver by sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands."
Okay. Now, the first 41, he sees David approaching, and Goliath walks closer to get a better look. And when he sees what's in front of him, not a soldier, no armor, no weapons, he's insulted. What is going on? I mean, what is this? You're sending out a kid? All he has is a stick, because he hadn't put the stones into his sling yet. When you read in your English versions that the Philistine cursed David by his gods, literally that reads, the Philistine cursed David's God, because he says Elohim. And as soon as he did that, as soon as those words came out of his mouth, David must have smiled, because he said, "Gotcha. It's over. You have signed your own death warrant." Because now it's not about me at all. It's about you and my God. You cursed him, you defied him, and this is what he says. He's going to make it plain that you don't taunt the God of Israel. It's not about David at all. David is taking no credit. As he approaches Goliath, he is just like water off a duck's back. He is just completely separating himself from who's doing this fighting. Now, I told you last week, the armor bearer has a shield. That was the best job in the army, holding Goliath's shield, because it covered him from head to toe. I don't know if he had little holes there that he could look out and see where he was going. Goliath was completely covered. He had a helmet that came down, and the only things that was exposed to him was the area around his eyes. I want you to catch all this. The only area that was exposed to him was the area around his eyes. I do like this part in the series about David, because in that series it portrays him as constantly practicing with his sling. And I got to believe that he did, because guarding the sheep, it would be so much better to hit a lion or a bear with one of those stones from a distance, so you don't have to have the up close and personal contact. Goliath completely covered just his eyes. And the Philistine said, "All right, come and get it, because I am going to feed you to the birds." And Robin, 48 through 58.
Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ephron. And the slain Philistines lay along the way to Sharon, even to Gath and Ekron. The sons of Israel were returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camps. Then David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Now when Saul saw David going out against the Philistines, he said to Abner, the son of Sharon, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" And Abner said, "By your life, O king, I do not know." The king said, "You inquire whose son he is." So when David returned from killing the Philistines, Abner came and brought him before Saul, and the Philistines fed him. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite."
Yep, Bethlehemite. Very good. So, notice in verse 48, when the Philistine rose, and that's where the commentators get the idea that perhaps he was seated after making the challenge, just waiting, because for 40 days nothing happened. And then, as David is putting a stone into the sling, he's running toward Goliath. Now, I don't care if you've got a shotgun, a rifle, a pistol, or a sling. When you're running, it's harder to shoot. Because you're not just going. He is twirling this sling while he's running toward him. And the only spot that was open in all of Goliath's armor is exactly where that stone went. Right into his head. I don't know how long it took before the brain got the message to the body, we're over. We're dead. But he fell face forward, and he didn't have a sword, so he just kept running. He got to where Goliath was, took his sword out, off with his head. Now, if you can imagine that scene, two mountains with the valley. Everybody can see these two go at it. I don't know that they could see the sling or the stone, but they saw Goliath stop and fall face first. And for the Philistines, their world must have stopped, because they're trying to process what has just happened. And then all of a sudden it dawns on them, run! Because the Philistines, they're cheaters. The deal was, I kill your champion, you become our slaves. You kill me and we'll be your slaves. Well, they don't live up to Philistines. You can't believe a thing they say anyways.
Yeah, well, he was the one who said it, not us.
Good point, Chuck. So they took off. And man, all of a sudden, Israel and Judah now got all kinds of confidence. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, forensics could have pulled that stone out and decided that's what killed him. So, I don't know whose tent David put, but when it says put his weapons, what he's talking about is he picked up Goliath's gear. Even though I don't know if he could have held the spear. It was like a weaver's beam with a head on it that weighed 15 pounds. But he took his sword, wouldn't be even able to hold the shield, and maybe that's all he took. But this is the thing. I want you to look at verses 55 and 56. Now, I don't know how many war movies you all watch. I love this period of history especially. I love this period. I love war battles, that history where there's no guns, before gunpowder, swords, horses, all. In all of those movies, the leader, whether it's a general or a colonel or a king, when they go to battle, where is the leader of the army usually? In the front. That's why he's the leader. He leads to war. No, look at 55 and 56. Remember a couple weeks ago when we were looking at this and Saul notices up on this hill, Philistines start falling over, and I mentioned it would be like looking at the wave. Jonathan is up there killing them. Saul is sitting under a pomegranate tree, iced tea. He said, man, there's something going on up there. What do you suppose that is? Here, David and Abner are watching. Now, when Saul saw David, he's not asking who David is, he's asking who David's father is. But they're watching. It gives you the impression they weren't close to the front. I think that he found another pomegranate tree. And he says to Abner, man, this is really exciting. You got any popcorn? Because I'm really enjoying this. Saul, what a character. So, they get a hold of David. I love this part. Now, we don't know how long this lasted, but I'm guessing that it was, there were some hours involved in it. And when he finally round him up and says, David, the king wants to meet you, he goes and he's still holding the head. See, David didn't get grossed out by stuff like that. He was just different. And Saul could have at least said, would you put the head down? I got some questions I want to ask you. But no, that was his trophy right there. Yeah, he said, I'm not putting this down. I earned it. Okay. Now, going from 17 to 18, it's not immediate. It's not chronologically, a couple of minutes later. Are you ready, Becky? Okay. Chapter 18, would you read the first 5 verses, please?
Now it came that when he had finished speaking to Saul, and the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, Jonathan loved him of himself. Saul took that day and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, David, with his armor, including his sword and his bow and belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him, and trusted, and Saul set him over the men of war, and it was pleasing in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants.
Now, David had been in the palace. We know that because he would play for his king. Obviously, Jonathan didn't, I don't know if he was a music hater or what. He didn't take any notice of him as a minstrel. But unlike his father, Jonathan was a warrior. And he had the same idea. Remember when they were climbing him, his armor bearer and Jonathan were climbing up that crag to meet the Philistines up there? And the armor bearer wasn't real sure what's going on. Jonathan said, come on. We're God's chosen. These are enemies. They're uncircumcised. That was a huge thing. They're uncircumcised. We're just going to go up there and we're going to smoke them. That's how it's going to happen. Jonathan loved that. After David, I got to believe that Jonathan was really intrigued by the fact that David just kept holding that head. And the first time they have a chance to talk, they bonded. There's quite a bit of confusion as to the timeline for these 3 guys, Saul, Jonathan, and David, but I like the one that suggests Jonathan was about 10 years older than David. I don't like the one that suggests Jonathan was 40 years older than David, because they go on to say that Saul was 80 when he died in that last battle. And I'm thinking, if you're 80 going into battle, you should die. I mean, what are you, He-Man? 80 is too old to be fighting. So I think, I like that, 10 years older than David. That's a good age to have a close friendship. And so Saul takes him in. Now, go back. Think about David's youth. What did we say about his home life?
None of his brothers or family liked him.
Yeah, horrible home life. If he did get to eat with the family,
Nothing left over.
yeah, and instead of having something palatable to drink, they gave him vinegar. They gave him rotten food. He just didn't have a decent home life. Now notice verses 2 and 3. Can you see the difference going on with David's life now? He's in a home. Forget it, that's the palace. Because Jonathan is in that home. And it was like a brother. And unlike his real brothers, Jonathan loved him. I mean, loved him. Would sacrifice his life for him. And something significant happens in verse 4. There is an example from history, and it has to do with the Acadians. If you're a history nut, you've probably heard of the Acadians. They are an ancient group, along with the Sumerians. They were some of the first tribes that organized themselves after the flood. The Acadians were a warrior group. And in their annals of history, they have recorded a situation that sometimes occurred when a father and mother would divorce. If the child was of age, now this happened with leadership. If your father was a leader, a general, a soldier, warrior, however you want to describe it, and him and his wife divorced, if the boys were of age, they could choose who they lived with. They could live with their mom, or they could live with their dad. Interesting, if they chose to live with their mom, they gave up all rights to become ruler. And as a visual sign of giving up those rights, they surrendered all the articles that made them who they were, their clothing. Look at what happens in verse 4. Stripped himself of his robe, gave him his armor, including his sword, his bow, and his belt. What was Jonathan saying to David here? Not only did he respect him, but what? Because Jonathan was next in line.
I'm stepping back and you're the next king.
Absolutely, Renee. Unbelievable. Early. Jonathan somehow, and I think it's probably prompted by the Spirit of God, not only made a covenant with David, but he said, this is how serious I am. You're going to be the next king. Jonathan didn't know David had been anointed. Had no idea. But you're going to have my robe, my armor, my weapons. Wow. I can't imagine how that made David feel, because he'd never experienced that in his life. And empowered by God, look at verse 5. Saul, who liked him initially, put him in as commander-in-chief. So he was ahead of all of the war men. He did not sit under pomegranate trees. When he was head of the war men, when he was head of the army, he went out and fought. He was out in front. When the soldiers of Saul came into battle, the soldiers were always so frightened. Lots of times they would just disappear because Saul was so frightened. From the moment that David takes over, before he becomes king, whenever David fought, his men rallied behind him. And we're going to see, I think it might be in the 19th chapter or later, it might be in 2 Samuel. Goliath has got family. They're giants. David's men systematically killed them. Saul was afraid of giants. David wasn't. Saul's men were afraid of giants. David's men weren't. He commanded men, mighty men. I mean, these guys are amazing because of the commander. We'll stop right there. Nice shirt.